Yes, welcome back to the Blue Room. Me and Doc McNair, we're really chopping this up, y'all. These conversations can go on for so long. And like I say all the time, I bless the mic because I got something to say. I rock headphones because I'm listening twice as much as I talk. I might talk a lot, but I listen a lot. I'm a counselor by profession. And this is episode 2, part 2. And this is masculinity assaulted. What are the consequences?
Mm.
Like, what are the consequences of the assault on masculinity in society? As Doc chopped it up in the last segment, the statistics show that men are valuable. The statistics show that men are needed in their communities. And statistics show that we aren't there, y'all. So masculinity is being assaulted. We're not going to talk about why right now, but we will talk about the consequences. So I'm gonna bring Doc McNair back on.
Yes.
He really never left. I'm gonna bring him back on. And Doc, I mean,
Yes.
I mean, you're an educator. I mean, you're big administrative in education too, and you've been doing it for a long time. So,
Yes.
from your perspective, what are some of the grave consequences of masculinity being assaulted in today's society?
Good question. Very good question. Um, Men have to step up. And what does that mean? They have to be there. And if they're not, if they're not there, the impact that it has on families, particularly our males, is devastating. You see some young men not knowing their father, not knowing um, not knowing how to express themselves in a certain way, perhaps um, expressing themselves in a way that can render them in a very bad situation. Um, from a standpoint of education, we see negative statistics as it relates to suspensions, and we see the impact that that has on young men and in prison. We talk about school to prison pipeline. Now, am I talking about causality? Am I saying the lack of fathers is causing all of that? There's some research to support that. But we know when things are lacking in the household, the implications are far reaching. And so I'm laying out some of the data that you see. And in certain communities where you have a better representation of fathers, some of that data isn't there. Some of the data, uh, as it relates to certain behaviors or crime and those things, it's not there. And so men, their value is limitless, but they have to be there in that space. And how do we get them there? How do we keep them there? That's the challenge. I hope I answered that, uh, Mr. Harris. I hope I did.
Well, you know what? I mean, it's from your perspective. I mean, and everybody has a perspective on it. And the consequences to me, for me, the consequences are grave because I put it to you like this. It's like having a car and you've been driving on bad tires.
Mhm.
You start thinking that it's okay to drive on bad tires until you get a blowout.
Mhm.
I'm that guy, y'all. I'm not good with cars. Uh,
Mhm.
I have driven on bad tires, and I just got my car fixed at Pep Boys, and
Mhm.
my van literally, you guys, was swerve off the road.
Mhm.
It was messing up the rack and pinion. It was messing up the tires. The tire rods were about to go out because since I was driving my car
Mhm.
without the correct wheels and without fixing the tire rods, I started thinking that it was okay to drive like that
Right.
until the car started going off the road. And I think sometimes we don't know what masculinity, we don't know when it's missing until it's gone, right? So, on a psychological level, kids have higher rates of depression. Did you know that teen pregnancy is higher in girls who are not raised with their fathers?
Absolutely.
It's the data is there. Substance abuse is higher in kids who don't live with their dads.
Yes.
Gun violence is higher in kids. I forgot, it's like 200 and something percent more likely to carry a firearm or something like that. Some outrageous, outlandish statistic.
Mhm.
All of these things are because we leave kids vulnerable. Because it's not that women can't protect kids, it's that men bring something that women do not bring. They
Mm.
just don't bring it. Okay, it's not, it's not a slight on it. Shaquille O'Neal was great down low. He could dunk, he could bully people, he could get rebounds, but he could not shoot free throws.
Mm.
And he's
Mateus,
still one of the greatest of all time. He could not shoot those free throws. So what I'm saying about what the consequences of it is, I think that it makes women work too hard to try to raise boys that they shouldn't have to raise.
mm,
They should be able to go to work, and a man does what he needs to do. There's
indeed,
certain things she shouldn't have to talk to him about women. She shouldn't
indeed.
necessarily have to talk to him about stuff a father would. So I think one of the grave consequences of it is we have stressed mothers out. We have stressed grandmothers out. We have put them in positions that they never had to be in if the
Mhm.
man was walking in his masculine energy and in the place that he needed to be.
I love it. You're right. Um, wow. When you Let's talk about ACEs, adverse childhood experiences.
Yes, I am familiar with it. I got some
Divorce
stats
is
for you. Go
divorce is
ahead.
one of them. I mean, divorce is one of them. And divorce obviously leads to single family homes. Um,
Correct.
and we know the implications of adverse childhood experiences. It's one thing to have one adverse childhood experiences, but when you start talking about two and three and four, that renders that individual in a negative situation. And you talked about sexual abuse. You talked about those things. Putting all that on a woman makes it very difficult, which lends itself to more issues when that individual grows up. Now, this is where it gets difficult. Is it, and I'm asking this question, is it okay, and I'm hoping it is, it's okay for us to say to women that sometimes we're asking you to do too much
Yes.
and
Yes.
not make them feel uncomfortable, don't want them to think that they can't do it all. Because a lot of them are doing some wonderful things. They're raising some wonderful men and young men. But I think it's okay for us to say, you know what? Sometimes we're asking them to do too much. Let's look at what the data shows. And I want to be sensitive to all those people that we're talking about. Not just because it's in my role, but also it's just the right thing to do. And so
Correct. Correct.
you'll oftentimes see me say, well, let me look at it from this standpoint. But I want women to understand that sometimes they're being asked to do too much. And the implications of that are far reaching. We talked about ACEs. If women are stretched too thin and being asked to do this and that, we know that something's slipped through, so to speak. And we know when you only have one income, for example, we know the implications of having one income. We know that
Yeah,
for
yeah,
sure.
yeah. We sure do.
We
Yeah.
certainly know that. But you talked about and what you were talking about, some of those aspects of abuse, it certainly made me think of ACEs, adverse childhood experiences.
Yes. And I will build upon that. I think the statistics say 60 to 70% of men have undergone a trauma.
Mm,
So 60 to 70% of men have undergone some sort of trauma by the time they become an adult.
indeed.
So the trauma of the man
Mm,
is a consequence, watch this, of their father not being there. Meaning that
indeed.
there are certain traumas that men undergo because their father wasn't there. Like this becomes a generational issue to a certain extent because we've gotten used to having households without fathers. We've
Yes.
gotten used to a boy making his own way. So it's a boy figuring out who he wants to be. It's a boy figuring out who his daddy is. It's a boy figuring out how he's supposed to treat a woman. It's a boy looking at TV and seeing rappers. I used to rap where you start treating women like you see rappers treat women. You start learning how to interact with the world based on what you see in media. And
Mm,
especially at times like this with social media, with Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat. Twitch,
Yes.
YouTube, all of this stuff, they're modeling the consequence is that they're modeling men that they should not be modeling their behavior after of. They should
Indeed.
not be modeling certain people on how to navigate the world. And it's
Hmm.
called reality TV, but it's so not reality. And our kids are trapped in that because they don't have masculine energy there to set a boundary. Now I'm gonna make sure I get your face in this shot too. I am not saying that women cannot set boundaries. That's
Right.
not what I'm saying. But
Right.
I do know when my father was there, it was
Yes.
a different story when daddy set a boundary than when mama did.
Oh, yes,
It
indeed.
was just a difference, y'all. It was just a difference. It was a little bit more fear there. And it's a little bit more, I better do what the hell he's saying because he is not playing with me. And that's what happens with boys. When boys have to deal with women setting boundaries their whole life, the police, a lot of them gonna be men.
Mhm.
Okay. Now the rest of the world is trying to help a little boy set a boundary, but he's not used to that male boundary. He's not
Mhm.
used to respect. He's not used to honor. He's not used to it being set appropriately. So now we view we view boundaries as control and abuse. And
Mm.
I believe the consequences is that young men don't learn how to respect order because there's something about the consequences of men not being in the home is that this is no reflection on sisters. We put too much on y'all. But you
Right.
know what? If daddy was there to set that boundary,
Right.
he might not have went as far as he did with you.
That's right.
Because one thing I did not do, I did not play with my daddy. What you
Oh,
got to say
absolutely.
about that, Dr.
And,
McNair?
and let me tell you something. Me and my brother didn't either. We certainly
Right.
didn't either. And I tell you, I thank him every day as I got older. And he passed about a couple of years ago. But I tell you, a week don't go past I don't think about him and the impact he had on me. But some people aren't as fortunate, and that's what this is about. Those who may not be as fortunate, how do we get our community to embrace this what we're talking about here with masculinity and valuing men and making sure that they do right by women and those things, and that's where we are. But Terrence, you said something that was very interesting. Society and the implications when our young men don't understand authority and the implications that has. 80 some percent of all educators are women.
Hmm.
And as you said,
Good,
most police officers may be
good
male.
stat, Doc. Good stat. Very
And
good stat.
and what does that mean? That means different things. And sometimes at the elementary level, they may not see a male teacher until they get to junior high. And if they don't have a male in that household, oh my goodness, when they first come across a male that's an authority figure, that may be a police officer. And if that young man doesn't understand certain aspects, that puts that young man at a disadvantage. Those are the
Most
consequences that
definitely.
we talked about when you don't have that male there. And
Yes.
my goodness. And so now he meets that male at the age of 13 or 14, or when they're driving, and then that male person looks like the quote unquote enemy, when actually he's not. He's just an authority figure. And now conflict. And we know how that oftentimes ends. And so that's why this conversation is important. And not just the conversation, but the practices need to change and how we go about some of those things. And you said something that was also interesting about social media. And I've written extensively about social media and the impact it's having on our youth. Do you realize that about 50 to 55% of those who are 11 years of age own a cell phone? About half the 11-year-olds in this country own a cell phone. A cell phone gives them access to this whole world. And if they're not, if the
Man,
infrastructure's not there in the home, if
most
the
definitely.
standards aren't set, oh my goodness, those kids are there for the taking because the influences that weren't around 30, 40 years ago. So all of those things, and one could argue, even now more so than ever, we need this family to come together because the influences are more stark.
Yep.
They're more they're stronger and are unyielding. this phone stuff and this social media goes 24 hours a day. And the implications of that are far reaching. Mr. Harris, that's wonderful, wonderful conversation.
Yes. And another consequence came to me. The sisters, y'all gonna love this because I could be a controversial guy. I tell
Uh-oh.
you, I could be
Uh-oh.
controversial, but
Uh-oh.
I am real about stuff. I will always be as honest as I can be. If I might misspeak sometime, but my heart is right. But
Mm-hmm.
but you're gonna feel this. We are creating some real pissed off women.
Mm.
Because you know what? Why should they bear that burden? Because we're not there. Now, I had somebody hit me on my comments from one of my posts, a YouTube short that said, a lot of these divorces are because women decide to leave men. That's a whole different conversation. But we are creating a system where it's harder to get men and women together because now women feel like men just aren't where they're supposed to be. Like if you were a woman, would you trust masculine energy if it's not doing what it's supposed to do? Would you trust men if men are not where they're supposed to be? I mean, trust is what governs a relationship. And if you don't have that trust, it's going to be pretty hard to navigate some of these relationships because you just don't understand that we're putting too much on our women. That is a consequence of it. That the longer men stay out of the home,
Yes.
the longer women will be mad that they're not there. And then I'm going to look directly into the camera when I say this. You have heard women say they do not need a man.
Ooh.
Because now they don't feel like they need a man because we haven't been men for so long that now they feel like they can make it without us. And the data shows that even if a woman can make it without a man, let me dispel that myth. I forgot the statistic, but women are way more likely to be poor when they raise a child by themselves than if they had a man.
Absolutely.
Okay. Another thing
Absolutely.
is, another thing is women, because they experience negative emotion more, that's statistically proven.
Ooh.
They experience negative emotions more, like sadness and fear. They're more likely to become depressed. They're more likely to have anxiety disorders. They're more likely to have to bear a burden that never should have been theirs. And then when it's time to unite the family, come on, man. How many? Let me change this camera view. How many times have you talked to a woman and they tell you they do not need a man? That's
Oh,
because they may not need you, but guess who does need you? Those boys.
they do.
That is the consequence. That us not being there further divides families who need both parents there. What you
That,
think about that?
Woo, that's heavy. That's heavy. And I want to make sure. I want to make sure that I can see some people moving in their seats and say, oh. But I think what you're saying hits on a lot of cylinders. Some women have said that they don't need a man, and perhaps they don't. But as you stated, the son does. And you look at some statistics, it show that they're better off. But your point about income and things of that nature, you're absolutely right. If you're a single family provider, the likelihood of you living in poverty increases exponentially, and that's in fact that's in all income groups, and I'm saying that's in all races and ethnicities, and so we certainly know that. But what impact does that have on the females coming up when they hear their mom say, "I don't need a man"? Oh my goodness! And so that kind of view perpetuates itself. And
Ooh,
as you
you stepping on some
said,
toes now. You right. You
it
right.
becomes generational.
That's
And
right.
so now they
That's right.
walk into this idea where I don't need
Man,
this person. We we're putting ourselves in a narrative that
come
does
on, Doc.
not put us in a light as in the Black community and as society as a whole. The family is the most important unit in this country, in the world. The
That's right.
family unit is the most important institution. And if that family's not together, the implications are far reaching. We see it in the communities. We see the communities being devastated with young men running around. I think of an old African proverb when it says it takes a village. People love that proverb. But
Man,
what does that look like? Village meant that the people empowered others in a community to help them raise their child. But when you have families or you have people that'll say, do not talk to my child, that means that village has no influence. So when we say it takes a village, empower that village. And I say that to say, for those women who perhaps don't have a man in the family, continue to reach out to others who can stand in that space. And for those uh, who want to help young men, provide an opportunity to be those role models. And Mr. Harris, you do that so well. You give up your time and your service, and I try to do that in my field because it does take a village. But keep in mind,
that's right.
the village can only do what the people allow the village to do.
Man,
Don't be upset when someone corrects your child. Welcome that.
shoot.
Welcome that.
Well, you know what? That's a whole different issue because you know what? Some of these boys, they become the king of that castle.
Ooh.
Everything that mama does is that boy. That boy. And he becomes the king of that castle. And he ain't ready to be no king because he hasn't
Absolutely.
had a king show him how to be a king.
Mm-mm.
You understand? She's the queen of a castle, but she's a queen without a king. So now he gets the throne too early because she showers with him with so much that he never learns how to be a king. He starts running the kingdom quicker than he's supposed to. But that's a whole different conversation. So what we're gonna do right now, I want you to wrap it up for me, and then I'm gonna wrap it up after you. I want you to stand flat-footed and just give us some of the maybe 2 or 3 consequences that you see since men and masculine energy is not in the home. Wrap this up for them, then I'm gonna wrap it up for them.
Number one, you have young men who are lost. And what does that mean? Lost? Lost in terms of their place in society and how they view their future. Number two, you have communities that are being devastated because of the lack of because of the lack of males being present in that community, and the implications of that are far-reaching. And so those are two things that we can say, and we know the consequences of those in terms of the criminal aspect and prison and all of those negative things we talked about. Uh, I hope I answered that. I can go on and on,
No,
but
you
I
got
hope
it. You got it. And for my wrap up, I'm gonna just deal with it from a slightly psychological perspective. It creates feelings of mistrust, abandonment, and rebellion in youth, even girls. Okay, even girls, they're confused. Number one, our youth are confused about how to interact with the world. They're out of balance with that. They don't understand what authority is. They don't understand what true relationship is, and they suffer with feelings of abandonment at a young age. And some of them spend the rest of their lives trying to compensate from something they should have just got from a daddy.
Mm,
You understand? And then the other ramifications that come out of that is achievement is lower
yes,
because there wasn't a father there to support. I'm not saying that mother wasn't there,
right.
but that father wasn't there to support. Another consequence, household is just not what it needs to be. I'm going to piggyback on the village thing. The village, y'all, just suffers. The
Yes.
village suffer poverty, teen pregnancy, depression, substance abuse, gun violence. All of that is a consequence of masculine energy not being there, of men not being there. And we got to have some sort of come to Jesus moment, Doc. We got to
Yeah.
have some come to Jesus moment so
Yeah.
we can fix this problem, y'all. And that's going to conclude this segment. And like I always say, I bless the mic because I got something to say. I rock headphones because I'm listening twice as much as I talk. If you are interested in being involved with the Blue Room, subscribe to Move Your Life to have access to the Blue Room podcast so we can galvanize men and unite our village, y'all. See you on that last and next segment.